Hi all, thank you so much for coming out on this snowy December evening, but it's lovely to be surrounded by these vibrant and dynamic paintings. Thank you firstly to Vivian Roberts, Artistic Director and founder of A Left Contemporary, for inviting me here today to moderate this discussion with the three artists of Bread and Games. This is the third exhibition presented here at the Bindery by A Left Contemporary. Before I formally introduce our artists, I'd like to defer to Paul Carey-Kent, art critic and author of the catalogue essay, to explain this exhibition's intriguing title, Bread and Games.
I'd probably defer to Miroslav, in that to be completely fair about it. It was his title, and although I've explained it in the text, I was really following largely his explanations.
Oh, this is great, passing the buck. But actually, it came as a result of talking about it. So it came as a result of our interview. So what happened in terms of the process? Paul spoke to each of us on Zoom in order to be able to kind of construct and craft his essay, and actually he raised a really at that point the title of the show hasn't been kind of completely set and solidified, and you came upon this really interesting idea of, well, actually there's such a positivity to a lot of the work, but there's also that kind of a little bit of a dark side, and the idea of celebrating something, and each artist being celebratory in their work, and relating it to nature and celebrating nature, and yet they're also being in each work in different ways something negative. And I thought of that idea of Bread and Games, Panem and Circenses, which is that old Roman concept of mollifying the population with cheap goods and celebrating that while being blind to maybe serious failings in society or whatever it may be. So, yeah.
And so now to introduce our three artists. So to my left we have Miroslav Pomichal. Miroslav was born in Slovakia. He now lives and works between Slovakia, London and Dorset, and continues to take inspiration from the dramatic landscape of Slovakia. Miroslav studied his BA in History of Art at the Courtauld Institute of Art. After working for a number of years in a museum and then a career change to a lawyer, he then realised he wanted to become a fine artist. So he pursued an MFA in Fine Art at Wimbledon College of Art. Now Miroslav expertly builds his subject matter with a sculptural treatment of his paint on canvas and his approach to volume. His paintings express a hope and optimism, but also ambiguities of political inflects on our daily lives, which we'll dig more into later. We also have Rachel Mercer here present today. Rachel was born in Cambridgeshire and studied at Cardiff School of Art and Design, before graduating and pursuing a postgraduate programme at the Royal Drawing School. She is now based in London, but has also completed residencies in China, building on her training in Chinese brush painting. Mercer paints figures in everyday domestic scenes and outdoor settings and aims to capture their interactions with those spaces and each other to capture the sensations that we experience in our modern world. We also have Archie Franks. Archie studied at the City and Guilds London School and then completed a postgraduate diploma at the Royal Academy Schools. It's very exciting to see his paintings move towards scenes, previously working with still lives where there's often a heaviness in the application of paint. But this series has more fluidity, which we'll talk about later. So yes, thank you so much to our three artists. I'd like to begin with the first question. Rachel, your fluidity and looseness of the brush relates to your perhaps human interaction with space and how the figures split between maybe the foreground and the background. But I was wondering if you could just expand on your physical application of paint and how it relates to what you want to convey.
There's vitality in the brushstrokes, and I want that to express the vitality of the movement that I see. I work from observation or from memory of things that I've observed. I'm interested, as you say, about figures moving through spaces and actions. And so when I'm painting, I'm also thinking about my own movement and action and how that can record that. There's also tactility and sensitivity, and I think that comes from kind of really trying to feel my way into the painting, and that might be through the textures of the clothing or the feeling of the space around. I hope to kind of really capture the movement and breaking up the edges is part of that. So the paint is kind of scraped and wiped, and that means that there's kind of room for the figure and space to be integrated.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, and also Miroslav, with your sculptural treatment of paint, I was curious how, with, for example, you have these really bright inflections and glows on your canvases, and you speak about how you work with paint, how a sculptor might chisel away at their raw material. So with these bright yellow glows, what did you want to achieve with like the depth of those shapes and everything?
Well, I think you've dropped a bombshell in your first question, which is how does painting relate to your subject matter?
Yeah.
Because in my opinion, for me, it's probably the most difficult problem. For painters is how does how we paint relate to what we paint, and I grapple with that every single day, I suppose, and it's actually really, really difficult to because I assume in a perfect world, then if we any scene we would paint or object or subject, we would have to then recreate an entirely new visual formal language, and I wonder whether that is the case for me. I mean, as a bit of a cop-out, I would say that the painting itself is the subject, and I know that might be kind of like maybe a lot of people say that, but for me it is true where the painting itself is a subject, while the forms and the scenes that are being created by it are kind of metaphorical of many things, but in the end it is a painted surface, and that tactile plane, let's say, and revealing and concealing through matter, it gives me just a huge intuitive pleasure, I suppose. So in some basic level, I have a need to paint like that, but I know there are like millions of references and millions of things. To answer your question kind of directly in terms of the yellow, I wanted to paint something really positive, actually. So for a few years I've been painting ruins, and there are metaphors for painting, metaphors for entropy, metaphor for bodily and societal collapse and all that kind of stuff. But I wanted to paint something the spirit beyond, or the sky beyond. So a famous person once said, that we're all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars. Oscar Wilde, right?
Say that again.
Well, we're all in the gutter, but some of us are looking up at the stars.
We're all in the what?
Gutter.
Oh, right.
We're all in the gutter. And I think that's what these paintings are about, where suddenly the viewer is actually within the ruined castle, but looking up at the stars, and that yellow, that kind of garish yellow, is I suppose that sort of futile hope.
Yeah, sorry, did you say something?
Well, I feel particularly innovative about the skies is that it feels as if, yes, they're celestial, but they're organic forms from the earth that have grown up into the skies. So although you're looking up at the sky, somehow you feel that earth has migrated to heaven in some way.
Yeah, certainly. There's a very expert handling of the composition where it's all relating, and it fills, and the forms sort of swirl upwards, and I think as well, Archie, you say a very interesting quote about how you want
your paintings to hold our attention. So on the surface level, there's a subject matter that we might be able to discern quite quickly, whether it's from cricket grounds to playgrounds or a landscape. And I think like all three of you do that. So Rachel as well, the pendant behind us with someone playing on a tyre swing, but definitely the way that you painted it holds your attention. You need to look further, and you want to discern more from it. But yeah, Archie, to come back to you as well. So, what did you seek to do in this series of paintings?
Well, I think with every, first of all, your questions like kind of in a way the only question that you think about in the studio, which is sort of what Miroslav touched on, which is that you have to like what to paint and how to paint it. And it's sort of describing something that's perhaps quite intangible and just finding a concrete way to describe it. So, I mean, this series of paintings, I actually had an online show with Miroslav last year with Aleph, and afterwards I kind of was quite low. I was quite sort of got quite down about it, and I was like, not about the show, but about. I think when you have a show, you have this thing called post-show blues sometimes. I had a bit of that. And I wanted to basically open up the subject matter and the motifs. And I thought I'd paint something that had a bit more of a positive twinge to it and felt counterintuitive as well to the art world, which I was getting increasingly sort of frustrated with. I'm not even frustrated with it. I was just increasingly not there with it in terms of what it's doing and that's another thing. So I thought cricket. I used to play cricket when I was a kid. I started playing cricket again for the first time in 20 years. I was obsessed with it, and these are sort of about those memories. And I think I was just chatting to Rachel earlier about her painting over by the door, and I was saying sometimes if you find a kind of a memory which it's very hard to explain to someone how that memory feels and the sensations it brings back and how it kind of functions in your life. And you try and find a sort of cipher for that memory, and you try and then find a way to describe that can be interesting to someone. So that's sort of how the paintings that I've made more recently came about.
It's really interesting how you can kind of feel that physical memory, I think, because it's also like a slow action with the cricketers. It's not like this dynamic, like fast ball flying through the air, but instead this like feel of the movement.
Yeah,
maybe.
It's a very rhythmical game, and it's like I think that's what gets you into it. Is that it's the rhythm of it. Even my dad is not really into it at all. I had 2 tickets to a match a few years ago, and I had very little friends that wanted to go, and they were all busy, the ones that wanted to go. And then, so I asked my dad, and he, after 3 hours of watching it, he said, I thought I'd be really bored, I just want to drink or something. But it's the rhythm of it that gets you into it. Mm-hmm. So I wanted something like that to come across in the paintings.
Are you working with like more thinly applied paint for this series compared to, because before you've spoken about Charles Soutine and as an inspiration with a heavy application of paint and intensity of colour, but this feels slightly different.
I've been making loads of notes in my book, and it's sort of about trying to paint appropriately to the thing that you're trying to paint. And I think like, as painters we all get stuck in a way, we're all like habit-forming animals and pattern-forming animals, and we try and create patterns, and especially when you're doing a hobby like painting or playing music or whatever it is, and you make habits, and sometimes you have to break those habits to sort of keep the thing evolving. And I think I've worked with still life since I was a student on my BA, really in that kind of thick manner, and I love painting quite thickly because it's very seductive and it has a sort of tasty element to it. It has a physical presence to it, but I think these were like I wanted to paint something sort of different, and it had to be a different treatment for that. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. And Paul as well, did you consider this as core question in your text?
I suppose what struck me about the three together in terms of paint is that to me you see the paint before you see the subject, so it's very visibly something made out of paint rather than I suppose an attempt to represent something so accurately you don't see the paint, and there's always both elements, I think, in a figurative painting. But here it's very much the process is foregrounded, and the process feels like it's integral to how the subject's tackled. So I think with Rachel you kind of feel that there's an inner experiencing of physical movement, of touch, of maybe cold, hot things as these children play, and it's the kind of rapidity of the paint strokes represents the rapidity of the actions. So you kind of feel that there's an integration there. And that's kind of how I think they all three, they operate in that kind of manner.
Definitely. And with Rachel's artworks, we sort of know, and like from our own memories, we can sort of discern what the backgrounds may be, and we can place them in our own memories. But you've allowed the formal qualities of the colour to take on their own life, and yeah, it'd be really interesting to hear more about the choices in colour in this series. So there's the artist group called the Antimies, also known as the Nimbies, as a French group from the end of the 19th century, and they started to explore colour for like properties beyond representation. So, for example, there's this portrait called Intimacy, and it's of a couple, and they're smoking in a small interior, and the fumes sort of swirl up, but they become part of the wallpaper. And so, just wondering how you explore that in your own work.
Well, I'll talk about memory first, because that is important to the work, especially my most recent paintings, because rather than I make observational drawings, but then rather than working directly from the drawings, it's actually just a memory aid. And when I'm in the studio, I'll start by mixing colours that work well together on the palette, but also resonate with the memory of the thing. And having those kind of pre-mixes means I can make the painting all in one go. And in the act of painting, I'm not thinking about colour too much. It's about the image coming out, and that relates to what we were talking about with these things are psychically strong with us, the memories of childhood, and the paintings, they are something I've observed, but they're also those tactile memories that we have as children. When painting a child going down a slide, I'm thinking about the skin against metal, and that the memory of you kind of like learning to lean back and relax into it as you go down the slide. And then in relation to the Nabi artist, I think like them, it's about the subject of the work being as important as the colours working together on the canvas. It's about the arrangement of colours in an abstract sense, and so I would say that was something that I had in common with them.
In creating the sensation completely, as you said about the figures leaning back on the slides of pendant, you can really feel that figure, pulling on the swing there to keep the balance, and it's good. And Miroslav, how do you choose your palettes? With there's the green and reds, do you look at colour theory to sort of see how they sing off each other? And
I teach colour theory, but I try to ignore it as much as possible when I make my work. No, so I'll be brutally honest. I love earth pigments to start off with, because they have good tooth and grip, and sometimes I like other pigments, translucent pigments, to start off the proceedings, and then in some ways I kind of layer my pigments either that they sing well together. That sounds like it's very Anglo-Saxon. They sing together, or they don't, or they quarrel, and then I kind of layer more and more on it. So sometimes I have a red ground and paint green on top of that, and then more red on top of that, etc., etc. Or sometimes I would use colours that scientifically work together in order to create, the kind of image that I usually have with these bigger paintings. I usually know what I would like them to do, so they're not as experimental perhaps as maybe other works or other artists, in the sense that they're kind of composites or they're synthetic. The big paintings are synthetic in a, not in a sort of polyester way, but in the sense of bringing together many elements that I've kind of planned in my head, and knowing that it will end up hopefully looking similar, which rarely it does, but it's going there. So but my favourite, all the patterns, isn't it, and habits. So Green Earth is just my go-to constantly, or Madder Lake. These are just kind of pigments that I kind of gravitate towards. Yeah.
Is there a pigment that, because if you're working between three locations, is there a colour that relates to certain places for you?
That's a good question, and actually in Dorset I'm making a completely different series of works, because you said something about the drama of like the Slovakian landscape in terms of the mountains, and it's not just that, but also the historical references. So these are called Peasants' Revolt, and now the references to not just historic medieval revolts, but the way that they were then mythologized in the 20th century in Czechoslovakia and Central Europe, which is not what happened in England. But there's so many local references that make the paintings look that way, while in Dorset I'm making works that are a lot softer because of maybe the softness of the hills, or of the English approach to their own history as well, which is less perhaps antagonistic and more kind of unitary, and a little bit more it's conciliatory. So it's a conciliatory painting, and this painting isn't conciliatory.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like the organic forms of some have become sharpened, but but in like a very balanced and composed way.
Yeah, and I think that's what Paul hit upon was just there was this kind of big ambition of creating skies with volume and articulation, and ones that actually had all these references to growing nature, to nature that grows in the earth, and that connection between the earth and the sky, and fecundity, but also the danger of that. So that's why perhaps those organic forms look both dangerous, both perhaps look like explosions, but also like rife life. So.
And then Archie, of your scenes as well. So your titles as well are quite specific, from village cricket to tea break. Do the colours relate to certain different times of the day of those cricket games?
Yeah, they do. Well, the colours are about sort of the light and different types of times of the game, really. So yeah, the colour. I mean, I always thought. I remember Howard Hodgkin saying that green was the most difficult colour, and apparently it's because we as animals have grown up needing to distinguish between green more, so we see more shades of green than any other colour. So I always got quite interested at art school in painting with lots of green, because I wanted to try and embrace that difficulty. So cricket was obviously mostly green, and it's sort of it's been interesting playing around with lots of different types of green and layers of green, and
that's a great space to explore it.
Yeah, it's kind of but it's sort of quintessentially, there's something quintessential about cricket in terms of its positioning as a motif, and it felt quite interesting because it sat on so many different borders of kind of how you think about something. So it's sort of it's a colonial export, and it's also kind of quintessentially English, as well as being a global kind of franchised big business thing. So it had a lot of different things as a subject that I liked, besides my own personal love of the game and experience of it growing up. So that's why I've made so many bloody paintings of cricket, basically.
Were you thinking at all about the effect of the uncanny with those green kind of blurs?
So in a very kind of subconscious way, yeah. I think that the tea break picture, I like that image because it had a church in the back, and I hadn't painted a church in it yet. So I thought, it's got the church and it's got them coming off, and them coming off the ground felt more melancholic somehow, that it was, this activity was over. I don't know, there's something, so that there's different atmosphere, the images I've chosen, that I've got these books of images from, like they all have different attributes to them, which are kind of interesting to draw out, or try and draw out anyway.
Bring in that archaic imagery, perhaps, and I don't know. It's nice to depict those in between moments of the game. And also, like with Rachel's the gather, is that? Could you tell us more about that painting as well?
So it's children in a sand pit, and they're collecting the sand, memories of sand in our shoes is one that we probably all have from childhood. Playgrounds in general are what most of the recent paintings have been about, and I think they're wonderful places to study people in movement and interacting with the world, but they're also kind of intimate spaces where the children get to know each other. I could go and paint busy commuter trains or something, but then they're very impersonal spaces, and the parks are like little microcosms of society where all of these different interactions are happening. And they're, just spending time there, I've just witnessed like really beautiful moments. I think I said to you, Paul, that I don't want them to be sickly sweet, and I think that's how, for me, kind of bread and games relates to this body of work, because they are when children are in play, there's something wonderful in that, and it's like a lesson for all of us, really, that we should more often try and kind of transcend that human condition that we have as adults, which is one of angst and kind of fear of the future, worrying about the past, and the play, they are able to transcend that. The bread and games is also about this kind of theme of distraction, and how we can how we need those, but then also it's also perhaps another way of looking at it is that kind of life goes on as well, and
or maybe that it is life.
It is life.
Maybe that's kind of that's what interested me about the idea of bread and games, is that is the spectacle, the thing that we think was the distraction. Maybe that is actually the thing we should think about. That's what I quite like, and I quite like the fact that Napoleon III used bread and games as well. I think it didn't. You could probably correct me, but he's saying the same idea of that in his shopping ideas and stuff like that, as a sort of means to distract from the government. And I think it's a really nice, whichever one of you properly came up with it, it's a really nice title. But I was sort of thinking on the tube today, I was thinking that actually, maybe that is the thing that we should live for. The cricket or the fairground or the playground, or that's
Yeah, like in this also like political time of uncertainty, and the cost of living crisis and war in Ukraine. It's just there's a lot going on, and it's kind of nice in a way if we can do if we have any agency within ourselves, and it's just to celebrate those small things and just to enjoy, those small pleasures of life. And it's true about when as children you're just kind of more innocently experiencing those sensations, and you're not overthinking the future, but just being a bit more. Even on my way here on the tube, I think there was a lot of angst going on, super crowded, but like a lot of the children were just kind of like, okay, and getting through that experience. Miroslav, how do you think this series of paintings for you relate to Bread and Games?
Well, I was going to say actually that what you just said probably then ties up to your first question about the painting and our joy and relishment of painting itself, and then the audience, and that kind of the aesthetic or the sensuous experience is maybe that becomes the important thing. I don't know if anyone knows, but I was on replacement buses all day today. I think I've told everybody. But for 3 hours, the driver couldn't extract himself out of Dorset. And at a certain point, I said, whatever will be, became stoic. But I was in the most breathtaking landscape, covered in hoarfrost and all that kind of stuff. And that aesthetic experience kind of just extracts you from all the things that you are completely powerless. You are completely powerless, and I think many of us are feeling more and more powerless with the fact we're thinking, should we switch the boiler on or not? And all of a sudden, to release yourself from that, and I think that's what artists, in a way, we're
so lucky to be able to do that.
Yeah, but we absolve of ourselves of the responsibility of a citizen by withdrawing into private fantasy worlds, and perhaps so Bread and Games perhaps is the metaphor for
being an artist,
for us three completely, or for any artist. So that's probably what I would suggest.
I think there are hints of the underlying serious issues in the way the particular subjects are tackled. So, say with cricket, it's a kind of nostalgic view of cricket as a village activity in perhaps softer times in a way. And even if you look at cricket as an activity, it's become much more commercialised and faster in a way which is separate from what's here. So maybe there's an undercurrent of that sort of nostalgia for something that's lost. In the same way, you could say that childhood is not the innocence experience it used to be. If you look at how social media affects children, for example, then there are undercurrents that aren't the same as just playing in the playground in a sort of way that forgets the modern world. And Peasants' Revolt is a kind of another metaphor for something which there's a possible way to look at it, which is very tinted by thinking what an admirable thing it was and how it set the agenda for how things have moved forward. But at the same time, you look at what's happening next door in Ukraine for Slovakia, then it's a very different kind of revolts going on at the moment.
Definitely. And with Peasants and Revolt, is it? Do you want it to be timeless and just speaking to revolts? Because it was interesting how you said it's mythologized in a different way in Slovakia than perhaps in England.
So the paintings work on two levels. The one level is the reference. So the reference is it goes back to communist countries, but in very basic terms, and also socialist countries in Europe found their special little peasants' revolt. You've had them, of course, in the Middle Ages, Wat Tyler, etc., etc. But they've, as you said, they've put them on pedestals and said, this is the beginning. This is progress started here. They made amazing films, like really some beautiful works of art are from that period. And so it's in the national psyche, in the cultural psyche. So if I would paint perhaps a mace, or a flail, or I've shown you just a random cover of a book from 1960s. Those are sort of symbols of. It's a very complex issue because, of course, we don't like communism anymore, and yet now we kind of do again because the democratic governments have proved to be corrupt, incompetent, venal, etc., etc. So, but we are still not allowed to kind of look at that subject matter completely positively. But anyway, that's the one layer. The second layer is the way I use it. So the revolt is more a metaphorical thing of the painter, of us revolting against perhaps, but being a bit of, you know, a bit like a Luddite, going back to painting rather than getting a norm, you know, being a coder or something like that. And I think so. It's a metaphorical, personal, private thing, and yet inflected with more kind of culturally specific, symbols.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And in terms of, as in, that's like a metaphor for revolt. And Rachel, you spoke about how you've been reading Heidegger recently. I just wonder if you want to say about that in relation.
Only that he talks a lot about angst being part of the human condition, and he calls it the state of distractedness, but then what I think I said this to you, that Heidegger has been useful to my practice because he talks about the process of presentness being about observation, and that's something that is important in my own painting. I'm not thinking about politics or what the meanings of the work are. It's mostly about the process of seeing something and then painting it, and it's for me it's for the audience and to infer meaning from that. I am interested in that process of the paint and the what happens in that moment, my own moment of transcendence in the studio, because that's what I'm trying to get to.
And how it's like the artist's task to see those material and objects, and so I think it keeps relating to how this Bradding game said, like, you just from your personal perceptions and things, and how you notice things about these ways of being, and then painting them, and then it's nice what goes forward from that, like it's being painted, and then what the audience wants to inflect or read into it. And Miroslav, it's interesting as well how you keep that balance. Like, of course, it's relating to these, you know, communist and socialist ideologies, but how, you know, it's behind that, but it's only one layer to the paintings.
And just to on Heidegger, it's, you know, angst is one side of care, and Heidegger, from what I remember a long time ago, said that we are anxious because we care, and I think that's also why we make art. We wouldn't be going through our struggles. I'd just be a lawyer, but we care about something, and I think that's also what distinguishes us from children in some ways. Inevitably, that, you know, these are products of care and decision and judgment, whether we like it or not in some ways, and anxiety is inevitable, but it's being sublimated somehow, you know. So we're keeping kind of drugged by ourselves.
Your own Bradding games.
Yes, exactly.
And Archie, so how have you found moving from painting packages of, you know, hot dogs and Waitrose wrappings to, I don't know, like, what do you see in terms of your own small studio mission?
In terms of my, I just try to expand what I do a bit, which is, you know, I have done landscapes for a while, so I did still life from 2008 to 2015 exclusively, and then moved into the landscape in 2015, and then I did some portraits in 2020 that no one's seen. I have. Actually, you've seen them in the studio, and Vivian's seen them in the studio. And so I see myself now as a genre artist that tries to tackle each genre accordingly. That's sort of what I see. But I was going to say, I just forgot. The paintings, for me, I always find they always have to come back to being about painting. And so in some way the subject and the way they're treated and the way that they are has to be about the state of play within painting somehow. But yeah, I mean, it's just also about keeping yourself interested and kind of thinking appropriately. So I've got that, written in loads in my book. Just think appropriately to what you're painting. Don't go back into habitual marks just because you know how to make that kind of gesture or that whatever. Think about what you're actually trying to communicate, and I don't know whether I've done it or not, but I'm trying in terms of what I'm making.
Yeah, Paul, you highlighted in the text that one of the links between all these artists was about the traditional genres, and
it is. Well, you could describe these all as people in landscapes, so it's quite coherent in that sense. And cricket, I particularly like as a kind of subject in the way that it's natural to have people in a landscape. And it's quite a rare thing to see treated seriously. And we had a little discussion around how many painters have actually depicted cricket.
Very few.
And it's somehow not very fashionable in the way that football's become fashionable. Although I think both our cricket and our football teams are doing well at the moment.
Yeah,
it's a good time for the show.
It's very exciting.
But it's nice the way that it's naturally integrated into the landscape, and with children playing is the same, and the way peasants were in the landscape, a very integrated way of living between people and landscape, if we go back to those times, which we perhaps lost another kind of nostalgic element to it. So I think it is a strong connection that you're then looking at how do people relate to nature, and that of course is a very hot topic for all sorts of negative reasons as well now.
Yeah, it's interesting, that relationship to nature, and I think how that changed a lot during the pandemic. Many people moved out of cities, and people, nature was like, we saw a lot of positive things from that. And it's interesting, you all kind of work between London as well, but you're all looking to nature in some form, or yeah.
Well, I teach a lot of Constable, and I'm obsessed with Constable.
I love Constable.
Anyway, we all love Constable. But to know just the extent to which his paintings are collages, are kind of artificial, are themselves nostalgic yearnings.
Nostalgic in the first place, and then
that's
they
what I'm saying. Yeah,
nostalgic for the thing that they weren't.
Yeah, so
it's kind of interesting. That's really interesting, isn't it? That sort of nostalgia for something that never happened.
Yeah, so just to let to the audience, like the Haywain, that's not what the English countryside looked like after the Enclosure Act and Napoleonic depression, etc. There were actual peasants' revolts in the 1820s. They were burning the machinery, etc., etc. That's not what the countryside looked like in 1821 when Constable was painting it. So that's the point, that he was making a make-believe landscape at that time. But now, of course, we think that that's what England looked like. And a lot of people get deceived, so it's a double deception or a nostalgia, and in many ways, actually, all those interests that you have in the painting as the matter of painting, and then that really, I just realised that kind of the figures in the landscape that you've just said. It's kind of, I think Constable is really interesting, and he was such a radical painter of his time, wasn't he? So yeah, I think it's quite cool.
Yeah, and he's also a painter who just enjoyed the touch on the canvas. So
yeah, definitely. Well, the whole Constable Snow and that abstract the texture, all of that, and also some of his quotes. Like
the surface is so incredible with him, and it's also the sense of you get of being somewhere. That's so amazing. Yeah, amazing proper art.
Let's go and see Constable tomorrow.
Let's go and see Constable.
It's perhaps interesting that the bit of Constable you think of looking at the three painters, I think, is his sketches, and there's a kind of modern tendency to perhaps evaluate his oil sketches above his finished products, which at the time he made them, of course, that was the big thing. There's a modern sensibility. So we also have our own way of looking backwards and changing how it was perceived at the time. So it's not just that we think the landscape is as it wasn't. We also evaluate the paintings in a way that it wasn't at the time.
Yeah, the qualities that we appreciate, and yeah.
James.
Thank you.
lovely. And does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask artists about paintings on show or anything? Okay. I think, is there anything you'd like to add before wrapping?
I just want to actually say about the cricket thing. It's a very challenging subject, I think, for contemporary art, and talking about it. No, it is because like for where I work, and you're gonna have an exhibition with someone who paints cricket scenes. Oh, lovely! What is it? Is it? And then it's too. Whereas so the people who like paintings of cricket perhaps are not the people who like contemporary art. Well, people like contemporary art, and I think it's a very purposeful thing that you're doing here, and it's actually quite challenging to view it. And it's great.
Thanks. Well, my friend, we were having a drink, and he said, what you want is who's that guy who writes for The Guardian? Who's
Jonathan Jones?
Not Jonathan Jones. The one who's Owen Smith. Is it Owen Smith? Anyway, you want Nigel Farage and The Guardian writer bidding for the same painting at auction. That's what we want.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Wow.
The kind of across the Brexit divide kind of. I don't. Thank you. That's what I want.
And then I relate that to your kind of quite gothic, morbid pictures of gothic novels, and I think that cricket picture is probably just as twisted and morbid as the other one, but very interesting.
And I think both of you have got very interesting kind of exacting motifs that I've not seen a lot of artists kind of. So it's been a real privilege to be in the same exhibition with you both. So thank you Paul for doing the catalogue.
So I do have one question.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think we need one. So how do you feel about your work when you see it presented in this beautiful space? I think it's very different from that kind of messiness of your studio, when you feel like your work is just your own. All of a sudden it's in this exhibition and it's communicating with other pieces and other artists. Do you kind of discover new aspects of your work that you maybe were not aware of before?
No, let's do it. No, you start.
Yeah, you do, and actually it causes you a kind of editing process that you then go back into the studio and you then reevaluate what's in the studio and how you go forward with it. So I don't know how you guys have felt, if you guys are artists and you've had exhibitions or anything, but it's very difficult to work through the show, and actually sometimes when you've done an exhibition you want to then move it on again, or you think about what was working, what wasn't, all those kinds of things come into play.
I think that my paintings look small in here and they're massive in my studio. And actually maybe that is the takeaway for me, is the scale. I've been working between scales, and the big ones are made, and now I've gone back to working small. And it's been lovely seeing your small ones, and they work so well. And I think I struggle to achieve that vitality in brushstrokes when it is small. But having gone big, going back to small, I think it's a thing that I can now tackle.
It's nice as well the way it's been curated, seeing the strength of smaller pieces as well next to each other.
Well, that was an interesting question, and it kind of, for me, goes back. So the whole idea of that revolt, it happened in 2015 when I kind of stopped making massive artworks that were meant either for big white cube spaces or nothing. And it was this idea, I almost felt being pressured by the art world to make a certain size, certain scale. And this idea of me just making actually classic small easel paintings is that revolt that I've been working through. And in a way, this is the result. There's an exhibition in a space that's a living space in many ways, that is organic. It's a gallery, but it's also a space, in part of a working building, with real details, with real things that you have to grapple with, like doors, for instance, or light switches, and all those things, and this format, which looks so sort of conservative and old school, old fashioned, which is that Luddite revolt that I'm kind of thinking about, makes it possible for people to see these works, and makes it possible for me to make them without feeling kind of physically burdened by it all. So actually the format and installation of it is actually, in my opinion, to do with a lot of how we work as well, and the kind of path we've chosen in order to kind of make our practices sustainable as well.
Yeah, a lot of it is that, but it's really nice to see it hung up by someone. So thank you to Vivian for doing a really good job of the hanging. It's sort of nice to see your work out of your messy studio and out of, put up, and you do sit in different ways, yeah. And then football.
We have 4 more minutes before football.
But yeah, I'd just like to end by saying that, a completely beautifully curated exhibition. I think it works wonderfully together, so it's great. It's on now for a few months through until January. So keep visiting. But yeah, thank you, Vivian, and thank you everyone for coming today. So enjoy the football.
Thank you so much. Thank you.